no one else.
They make a lovely couple. A Lannister and a Martell. They have no idea how dangerous that is. We must protect them.
Yes, my prince.
You haven't had to use that axe of yours in a long time. I hope you remember how.
Acting dynasties are as much a part of the cultural and historical lexicon as political ones. It's rare, however, that a single person encompasses both camps. Actor Alexander Siddig, born of a Sudanese father and British mother, is that rarest of birds, however. Born November 21st, 1965 in Omdurman, Sudan, as, and I'll apologize in advance because I'll probably mangle this incredible name, Siddig El Tahir, El Fadil El Siddig, Abdurrahman Mohammed, Ahmed Abdel Karim El Mahdi. Hope I got that right. Siddig initially shortened his professional name to Siddig El Fadil, and then to Alexander Siddig as a tip of the hat to his maternal uncle, Malcolm McDowell's most iconic role as ruthless teenage gang leader Alex in Stanley Kubrick's A Clockwork Orange. Siddig's parents met in the 1960s when his mother traveled to Sudan with a friend who introduced her to Siddig's father, a member of Sudan's ruling family at the time. Siddig's father was a student at Cambridge University in the 1950s and was proficient in English. Siddig's uncle, Sadiq al-Mahdi, was Prime Minister of Sudan from 1966 to 67, and again from 1986 to 89. Siddig is also the great-great-grandson of Muhammad Ahmad, a Nubian religious leader who was proclaimed the Mahdi by his disciples. Siddig moved with his parents to London at age 2, where he spent the remainder of his formative years. After preparatory school, Siddig attended University College London for a year, then enrolled at the venerable London Academy of Music and Dramatic Art, aka LAMDA, focusing on acting and directing for the stage. His first break came portraying Prince Faisal in A Dangerous Man, Lawrence After Arabia, opposite Ralph Fiennes, who also made his debut in the titular role.
أمير ما كي يرجع إلى العباسيين تكون غبي وأحمق لا تتصور أن حامل هذا اللقب يتهم كثير إن دفته إلا هي لقب ملك أو أمير رئيس أو حمار.
My father is the descendant of the Prophet Muhammad, and for 900 years my ancestors have been Sharifs of the Holy City. No other title in the world compares in splendor. 180 million Muslims share this view. The Emir of Mecca goes back to the Abbasides. You are an impertinent fool if you think the bearer of such a title cares in the least if you call him in addition king, emperor, president, or donkey.
Siddig hasn't stopped working since, finding most of his success on television, particularly in the role of Dr. Bashir in Star Trek Deep Space Nine, forever cementing the young actor in the sort of iconic status reserved only for those lucky enough to become part of pop culture history. Siddig has other notable appearances in feature films such as Syriana, opposite George Clooney and Matt Damon, Kingdom of Heaven, directed by Ridley Scott, Rubinada's Cairo Time, opposite Patricia Clarkson, and Julian Schnabel's Miral. Some of the high-profile television that have featured his talents include Peaky Blinders, Da Vinci's Demons, Game of Thrones, Gotham, The Spy, and Deep State.
There is an ancient story amongst my people of a man who could not die. In his time, he committed terrible acts, raised a great kingdom, and then vanished.
What happened to him?
If the legend is to be believed, he walked away from his throne, vowing that one day he would return and complete his destiny, but that would require a particular knife.
This knife.
A story, as I said. But to my people, very meaningful. I hope that satisfies your curiosity.
Some. But you see, Minister, my chief concern is there's a boy, the grandson of the curator. He's being hunted. Now, perhaps that's because of the knife. Or perhaps the killer thinks he saw something.
Did he?
No.
then he's safe.
Yes, but you see, I would have to know that for certain before I would do anything that might affect the case, such as release the knife.
May I see the knife, Detective? It would so set my mind at ease.
Alexander Siddig's latest effort is a fun, campy science fiction flick entitled Skylines, about a virus threatening to turn Earth-dwelling friendly alien hybrids against humans. Captain Rose Corley, played by Lindsay Morgan, must lead a team of elite mercenaries on a mission to the alien world in order to save what's left of humanity. Siddig portrays her commanding officer, General Radford, and seems to be having a ball in this Roger Corman-inspired romp. Distributed by Vertical Entertainment, Skylines is available in theaters, on demand, and digital, starting December 18th.
You're the only one who has the power to retrieve it.
Enough! Colonel, give us the bridge.
Sir, let's go.
There has to be an easier way.
Rose, you are the only way. I know this is far from ideal, but we face extermination. We all have to push beyond our limits.
And what if I can't?
You've saved us all before. And when the time comes, I know that you will make us proud.
When do you embark?
As soon as you say yes.
What the hell are we waiting for?
Alexander Siddig joined us remotely from his home on the east coast of the U.S. to discuss his remarkable life and career. Here's what transpired. So let's start with Skylines. Skylines reminded me of the best kind of Roger Corman movie. It was so much fun.
So I'm really glad you got that, because it's one of those things that I think, because it hasn't been done for such a long time, people aren't making these kind of movies. I mean, not since, Roger Corman. I mean, Neil Marshall has a go with these kind of ideas sometimes. And there was John Waters. I mean, there's a whole bunch of people who make what are cult movies before they've even started. Obviously, it's going to have some things about it that people are going to be like, well, it's not that I'm not geared up to know this kind of film. I don't know. I can't invest 3/4 of an hour in the build up. But my God, when you pushes that button and the movie kind of explodes, it does it so well, so tongue-in-cheek, and there's such a great sense of humor about it. And I wasn't sure when I first started it, and when I read it, whether the director and I would be on the same page. That was just such a blessing when he said, you know what, you're right. This is one of those movies, and we're going to have fun here.
And what made it work for me is that the whole cast seemed to be in on the joke and the way it was played. I mean, it was really pitch perfect. During the first 5 minutes, I was like, oh boy, what am I in for here? And then I got into the spirit of it, and I realized what you guys were doing. It was really a lot of fun.
Me too, for that reason. Partly to reintroduce people to this sort of thing. I mean, again, you mentioned Malcolm, my uncle. His muse, his directing muse, was a guy called Lindsay Anderson. He made some phenomenal films with him. If and Oh, Lucky Man, absolutely. And Lindsay specialized in this sort of satire, this kind of movie. He didn't do sci-fi. Well, he did a kind of sci-fi with Britannia. It's just a genre mashup. And then you've got that, thrumming thrash metal coming in the soundtrack every now and then, which is very Neil Marshall. And it just, I'm really happy. You're the first person who's just got it without me having to say it to you. So I'm really...
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Cobalt 1.
Looking at your filmography, one is struck by such a preponderance of sci-fi and fantasy. So the obvious question is, were you always a sci-fi and fantasy fan, even as a kid?
Yeah, I was reading in my bedroom. My stepfather, as I was we were learning to get to know each other, would read to me at night as I fell asleep, and he would read H.G. Wells, and he'd read it. He had the whole complete set, and he'd read it from the beginning. He would, with his mellifluous voice. He had Asimov in the bookshelves. He had Carl Sagan in the bookshelves. but it was all heavy, hardcore sci-fi. None of this was. I mean, H.G. Wells was possibly more populist, but the other stuff, Asimov, boy, it's tough stuff. So yeah, I think I did, although I didn't really know it. I wouldn't have said I was a sci-fi geek. I didn't go out of my way. I loved fantasy books. I read those too, but that was when I was much older, in my late teens. And then, Star Trek came along, and Star Wars blew my socks off when I saw that in the movies. And I just loved it. I would never have classed myself as a sci-fi fantasy kind of person, but actually I think I am, now you mention it.
Your background is really fascinating. Your mother was English, the sister of Malcolm McDowell. Your father was Sudanese, which is a combination you don't hear about very often. How did they meet?
An archaeologist called Robert Erskine took my mom to the Sudan to show her the ruins in Nubia, the very north of Sudan. They came back down on the Nile, and I think he was sort of trying to show off to her. And he said, well, listen, I'll introduce you to the kind of ruling family here. So she said, sure. And she got off the boat in Khartoum, the capital there. And this man in flowing white robes came walking down the jetty to meet her. And that was going to be my father. She was an extremely glamorous lady, my mom. She was a model, and she was a PR, public relations person for theater. She, did the first she was the PR person for the Rocky Horror Show and a bunch of different things, but the Royal Court, primarily theater in London. So she knew a lot of fascinating people. I got to know them as I was growing up, and what an interesting mixed up bunch they were. A lot of them closet queers, as they were called back then. Now, thankfully, they're just queer, which is great. So I had a whole bunch of fascinating kind of people around me in my life as a young boy. So yeah, she met this guy. She moved out to the Sudan for 3 years. She learned Arabic. She insisted on some things being changed for her, so that, for example, she was permitted to eat with her husband. That was not permitted in the culture up until then, and she absolutely refused point blank to not let that happen.
Did she convert to Islam?
No, she wouldn't do it. The only thing she would do is she'd named me Siddig, which they insisted on. And I mean, it's a negotiation.
Since you brought it up, you have the most remarkable real name of any actor I've ever seen who's changed his name for professional reasons. And if I counted it correctly, you have 10 names.
I have at least 10. They're just the ones that we use. And that is basically a genealogy. And that's why we use those names.
Could you tell us your full name?
I don't even remember it fully. I mean, I'll tell you some of it. I mean, Siddig is me. Al-Tahir is my father. Al-Fadil is his father. Al-Abdurrahman, Abdul Karim, Al-Muhammad Ahmed. And then we go to Al-Mahdi Al-Sharif, depending on where you want to go next. But these are just key people, men primarily, well, exclusively, not primarily, in my family. So Abdurrahman was great-grandfather, led the Sudan.
You have another prominent uncle who was a 2-time prime minister of Sudan. Is that correct?
Yeah, he was the youngest ever prime minister in Sudan in his early 20s. Twice was prime minister, both times democratically elected, unlike any other ruler in the Sudan since. So, yeah, the Sudan misses him.
I know that you moved to England when you were about 2 or 3. Did you develop any sort of affinity for Sudanese culture or the Arab world as you were growing up?
That's a really good question. I think probably the best answer is no, although I did have an interest. I mean, I when you're a young kid coming in from some other part of the world where everybody is not white, and you arrive in England and you're with just white kids, really, I don't think I ever met any others. I mean, until I was about 8. It's interesting. Before I was 8, the kids didn't just treated me as me. They didn't really have a sense of color. But when I hit 8 and went to school in a private school, there was one other black kid, and suddenly race became a big, big issue. So I was assimilating so fast, so hard, trying to become like them, become normal, become invisible, that I couldn't stand being spotted from 100 feet away as being different. And England in the 70s, and this, that was very much a racially divided country, and not conspicuously like it was in the States, where you had to wash in different washrooms, and people were regularly tortured and beaten up. But it was definitely a 2-tier citizenry, and we were in the 2nd tier. So school was my big learning curve. So I kind of try to avoid all things Sudanese because they just weren't good for me as a self-defense protocol as a child. But I kind of took an interest later, but I sadly forgot the language because I knew it and it atrophied. Once it had gone, I lost my real connection to it, to be honest.
I read that after 9/11, you became sort of repoliticized, being aware of what was going on in the Arab world versus the Western world, and you accepted a lot of parts in movies based on that. I'm guessing Syriana was chosen for that reason primarily, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, Kingdom of Heaven was really the first one. Well, actually, the first one was, Lawrence After Arabia.
Oh, yeah, I thought it was great.
It's a pretty decent film, isn't it?
There was a time, remember, Lawrence, when all the tribes came to my Meshlis tent. Line upon line of their princes, kneeling before me in the sand and swearing their allegiance to me. And at the end of that day, you came to me, and you knelt in the sand, and you swore yourself to me. What have we got from all this performance? You are the talk of Paris, but what of our cause? And of course, they have not produced the letter I asked for. They promised to send an international commission, but they haven't even got round to choosing their commissioners. And I am still not recognized by any of them. Is this all a pretense? Lawrence, think of something to do. You were so full of ideas.
I have.
Already.
And a lot of people might not be aware that you were following in Sir Alec Guinness's footsteps, who played the same role in David Lean's legendary Lawrence of Arabia, made 35 years before.
Yeah, and I got a postcard from Alec Guinness. I got saying, "You did a much better job than me. Thank you very much." And that was one of the happiest moments of my young life, to get a postcard from Alec Guinness. And it was a terrific piece it was David Putnam who produced it. And I believe, and if for those people who don't know David Putnam, they should watch, The Killing Fields, or one of the movies that he made back in the 70s and 80s. He's the finest British producer, really, and he still is, except he kind of gave up and went into politics, which is great for politics because he's a sane human being in the political world. But I had the privilege of being in his last film, A Dangerous Man, Lawrence After Arabia, with then the nascent Ralph Fiennes, who was...
Yeah, and that was his first film as well, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. So it was quite a thing. And then I did Hamburg Cell immediately after 9/11, which was a kind of study of the kids who blew up the planes. And to be honest, it was a little early for the world to see that. And they were not happy with the depiction, the humanization of those children. I'm calling them children. They're not children. They had free minds. They're adults, but they were young people. I have a horrible tendency to patronize anyone under 26 by calling them child. Because my kid's 24 and he's never going to be anything but a kid as far as I'm concerned. So yeah, it was a little early for that movie.
Are you ready for martyrdom, Abu Tariq? Are you ready to give yourself for Allah?
Yes.
Then this will be a glorious operation. And you will be Shaheed.
I knew you could do it. I have prayed for this day.
Brothers, when you get back to Hamburg, you will start applying for visas to get into America. We are going to strike at the Americans where they think they are invulnerable, inshallah.
Inshallah.
In their own homeland.
Inshallah.
But first, you must learn to fly planes.
A hijacking?
You'll be told in due time.
But then, I did A Kingdom of Heaven, which was a brilliant film by Ridley Scott. And if you ever watch it, please don't watch the studio version. Watch the director's cut.
Oh, yeah, I watched the director's cut. In fact, the Blu-ray is in my library. I'm a huge Ridley Scott fan. Did you have a good experience with him?
I had a wonderful experience with him. He is every bit the guy you wanted him to be. He's a shy wallflower. You probably talked to him, but he's a shy wallflower when he's chatting, in a social setting. He doesn't really extend himself, but on set, my God, he comes alive, and everything's an effing C, but no heads roll. He's just that way. He just sounds that way because he's so desperately trying to get the shot right. and we will wait days for the smoke. I mean, there's one scene we shot at the same time every day for 3 days because the sun was perfect. And we just picked it up every single day for 45 minutes and then dropped it and went back to it again the next day. So that kind of meticulous filmmaking is kind of over, to be honest. I mean, there are a few, but no one has that kind of money or privilege anymore.
A very good horse. Take the horse. And be about your business.
This is your prize of battle. I am your prisoner, your slave, should you wish it.
I have been a slave, or very near to one. I will never keep one nor suffer any to be kept. Go.
The man you killed was a very great cavalier among the Muslims. His name was Muhammad al-Fais.
I will pray for him.
Your quality will be known among your enemies before ever you meet them, my friend.
Let's go back a bit. When did you realize you were an actor? Was there one sort of epiphanous moment, or was it a gradual progression for you?
The moment I realized I was an actor is quite surprisingly about my 40th year. I just released Syriana, and I think that was the first time I got some sort of like, oh my goodness, that guy can do this. And up until then, I'd been fighting it because I wanted to direct. And I'd been wanting to direct so badly since I was 15 that everything in my life was focused on directing. And I finally relaxed and went, you know what? You are an actor, and be okay with it. And that was pretty much after the almost universal praise for Syriana. And that wouldn't have happened if it hadn't been for, George Clooney, because no one would have seen it. So it was a very lucky coincidence. And also the fact that the film had to be edited drastically and storylines cut. And my character became not just a supporting role, but the kind of focal soul of the movie, which changed a lot of things for me.
I studied at Oxford. I have a PhD from Georgetown. I want to create a parliament. I want to give women the right to vote. I want an independent judiciary. I want to start a petroleum exchange in the Middle East. Cut the speculators out of the business. Why are the major oil exchanges in London and New York anyway? I'll put all of our energy up for competitive bidding. I'll run pipe through Iran to Europe like you proposed. I'll ship to China. Anything that achieves efficiency and maximizes profit. Profit which I will then use to rebuild my country.
Great. That's exactly what you should do.
Exactly. Except your president rings my father and says I've got unemployment in Texas, Kansas, Washington State. One phone call later, we're stealing out of our social programs in order to buy overpriced airplanes. We owed the Americans, but we've repaid that debt.
Well, I know you went to university for drama. You studied at Lambda in London. I'm wondering, how did your family react on your mother's side, on Malcolm McDowell's side? Was their reaction, oh, God, there's another performer in the family?
They were surprisingly lovely about it. My mum, my grandma, and all the white folk were just really encouraging about it. They were terrific. It was the Sudanese that didn't like it. My father said, "You make sure he can do anything, but he becomes an actor over my dead body." And everybody was like, "You cannot let him become an actor," because it's back in those days in the late 80s, it was tantamount to prostitution. Actors take money for sex basically, and it's a haram.
Did Uncle Malcolm offer you any advice in the beginning?
Not that I remember, no. I don't think we even talked about it ever. I mean, I think eventually when I got a movie, The Dangerous Man, he picked up the phone and said what a great job he thought I'd done. And from time to time, we've noticed each other's roles. But because we both act so much, we don't really go out of our way to watch each other's project.
Although you did work together once. You did a film called Doomsday together.
We worked together on Doomsday, and indeed, yeah, which was it was fantastic. I mean, of course, I hardly saw him. He's a special I don't want to say old-fashioned. He's an eccentric actor of a breed that really no longer I've never met another like. And if I had been around, with some of the greats the British greats of the 70s, I would have seen a lot more of them. That they're all gone away. These fast living, burn the candle at both ends, rock and roll stars, which is basically what he was as a movie star.
We'll be right back to our interview with Alexander Siddig, and we'll discuss Deep Space Nine as well as touch on politics and culture in today's world. Did you know that the Hollywood Interview connects directly with the audience on Facebook? Join our page for discussions about the interviews you hear on the podcast, and also join the Hollywood Interview Facebook group to connect with other cinephiles such as yourself. This is not the bubblegum media crowd, but real movie buffs who appreciate real filmmakers in a curated space which stays on point. I've spent a lifetime in Hollywood studying movie making and movie makers. Come join me for discussion on movie makers and the art of cinema. I'll see you on Facebook at The Hollywood Interview. The Hollywood Interview podcast is powered by Patreon. For just $2 a month, you can join in supporting The Hollywood Interview and keep getting these great interviews ad-free. 2021 will see this podcast change a little as we have grown into the advertising space. Patrons like Donna Bailey have come on to the crew. Thank you, Donna, for your patronage at the film festival level. You received the key crew position of First Assistant Director. We know you will keep us on schedule. Thank you also to Kirsten Langston, who is a Sunday matinee patron and joins the crew as a costumer, making the cast look great.
My name is Alexander Siddig, and you're listening to The Hollywood Interview, and I strongly urge you to listen to them on Patreon.
You too can join the crew of The Hollywood Interview and keep getting these amazing episodes ad-free. You will also gain access to exclusive bonus episodes. Go to patreon.com/The Hollywood Interview and become a patron today.
Giving them a chance to contribute doesn't necessarily mean sanctioning what was done to them. They didn't ask to have their DNA tampered with. They were only children. And why should they be excluded just because their parents broke the law?
You're right. It's not quite fair. But even so, it seemed like a good way to discourage genetic tampering.
Besides, it's not as if we're trying to exclude them from anything. We're just talking about, limiting what they're allowed to do.
Like joining Starfleet.
Exactly.
Are you saying that I shouldn't be allowed to wear this uniform?
No, you are an exception.
An exception? I should be used to that. I've been one all my life. First because of the DNA resequencing, and now because I've been allowed to join Starfleet.
Perhaps I should not have said anything.
No, it's all right.
Let's talk about Star Trek. I remember when Deep Space Nine premiered, it was like, after The Next Generation, I was thinking, come on, really, another one? And yet I immediately got pulled in, and I thought your character was really interesting, especially the way he was written, because you were following in big shoes, being preceded by Doctors McCoy and Crusher. So they really had to turn this guy into a unique character. He was sort of like this Nietzschean man versus Superman type character, with genetic engineering and everything that made him a superhero on one side, yet immortal on the other. And it's like the two sides were in a constant battle. What was that like for you?
Well, I was 26 when I started. And as far as I was concerned, I didn't have any baggage I didn't worry about the size shoes I was in. I didn't worry about anything but being as convincing as I could possibly be. On my trailer door on the inside, when I would leave to set, every single time I was called, it just said one word, voice, ! And I was just going, right, I've got to get my voice I must be grounded. It must be work on my voice, because it was really high pitched. And I just was concerned about that. When it got to, as we filmed, of course, the show wasn't doing very well, and my character was really quite unpopular. And there was at least 2 times at the end of 2 seasons that Rick Berman, the studio side exec producer, said, I had to save your ass again this season because they wanted me to fire you. And he didn't say it like that. He said it much more gently and relaxed. He wasn't like, dude. He was like, I just want to know, I did save you this season. And they did it twice, which is quite a lot for a series actor where the world is pretty ruthless. And so I was incredibly grateful and just tried to do what I was told in the simplest way possible. But then it became complicated later, to answer your question. I'm thinking about the 4th season where it turned out that I was genetically modified. And we had just adopted And I love Michael Dorn, and I'm really happy that he came on the show, by the way. And I don't want him to think, if he ever hears this, that there was some sort of acrimony between us, and there certainly wasn't. We were great friends. He came to dinner all the time. But I thought, well, that's a cynical move. We got Worf, because what they're doing is transferring some of the glamour from The Next Generation to Deep Space Nine, because they think Deep Space Nine hasn't got it. Deep Space Nine isn't good enough. And I was quietly, although unvociferously, kind of upset about that. And then after that, when it turned out that I was genetically modified, I went, wait a minute, they're turning me into Data. They want another person from The Next Generation, but they can't get Data. So they're going to turn me into it. And that was where my mind went, because I was already cynical about the Worf import. It turned out that Worf was great for the show. And it turned out the genetic modification was not what I was making a mountain out of a molehill. But maybe had I not made that mountain out of the molehill, it may have become more cynical and a bit more Data-esque, and I would have suddenly been doing sums that no one else could do, incredibly fast, to mirror The Next Generation, because I think we were all resisting becoming The Next Generation. But of course, the studio wanted us to become The Next Generation because our show was doing so badly by comparison.
We have to talk about a lovely film you did called Cairo Time. It was sort of like a modern update of David Lean's Brief Encounter, which is one of my favorite movies. And it was really just nice to see a movie with two adults talking and relating, and the whole thing being about relationships and not about explosions and flying people who wore tights.
Thank you.
Normally I don't like these new modern things, but I took a photo of my mother when she was just waking up, and now I love to take surprise photos of people. The water makes you uneasy?
I can't swim.
Really? But I thought everyone in the West had a swimming pool in their home.
And everyone here has 4 wives.
Not just 3 for me.
Are you married?
No, I never married.
Really? No children? How long have you known Yasmin?
I was a student in Aleppo when we met there.
Oh, really? I've always wanted to go there.
It's a beautiful city.
The Center for Oriental Music.
You know this?
Of course.
I studied composition and she was a student, but I didn't take it any further.
Why not?
I was not very good.
Yasmin is beautiful.
Yes, she is. It was a childhood
crush.
I assume you've been to Egypt before, since it's very close to Sudan. But what were your impressions of being in Egypt during that period, which was so close to the Arab Spring?
I was so shocked when the Arab Spring happened. I was as shocked as the rest of the world. We did not see it coming. No one saw it coming. And yes, it happened 2 years after we filmed, or at least after Cairo Time came out. And all I remember was this Nile, this river, this thing that had come up from the very darkest part of Africa, the very center of Africa, and looking at it while we were filming, because we were filming on a bridge overlooking it, and thinking about all the stories this water, this swirling, murky water held. And it was very romantic and moving to me. And the city was teeming with life, and it wasn't at all unpleasant. It was just like it had, I'm sure it had been 2,000 years previously, apart from the colors had become more gaudy. And no one had been, fewer people had been to school. But I think we loved it. I mean, a lot of people didn't like it. My wife was there. We met on that film. We didn't get together for a subsequent 7 years or something, but we met on that film. She was the lawyer, and she didn't like it at all because men intimidated her. So I think a woman's experience is very different. And especially I'm a brown man, so I fit right in. I'm actually, a cousin at best. So I loved it. I think the Arab Spring was such an epiphanal moment for the Arab world, such a pivotal turning point that could have really turned into something extraordinary. And unfortunately, it didn't, and that's partly with all due respect, the American and the English influence, mainly because there's a willingness in this part of the world, certainly, to export democracy. And so this need to export our way of life is very attractive because, along come with it all the chain stores and the huge middle class wealth and colored flat screen TVs for everyone and all that. But it just doesn't work in some countries, and they're still vulnerable. And the Arab world in particular doesn't suit that without some organic predisposition. It needs to have some really slow burn to get to that point, because that's my very amateur opinion. I'm not a foreign policy expert, but
would you like to do more politically oriented projects in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I love doing them, and I loved just as much as I love doing the crazy stuff, the sci-fi stuff. Just as much as I love doing Skylines. I will always make a Skylines if I'm lucky enough to. Every few years, I will always go back, or I will do a children's show or something that connects everybody. And then I will try and do the other thing that cinema is good at, and that is soft diplomacy. And that is, introducing them to people of color, Arab people during a time when people hate Muslims. I feel that as long as they get to meet one, they invite one into their living room, which they have to do. You can't barge your way in there, and that they like you on some level, either as a villain or as a good guy. It doesn't really matter, but that they respond. They will always have met their first Muslim, and that is the beginning of something. And that it was an intimidating experience, and it wasn't an unpleasant experience. And they didn't shout and go Allahu Akbar or anything terrible in their house or in their face, but that they seemed like someone who their dad might know, or, just someone who'd hang around, or a professor at school, or one of those guys. And that's kind of my kind of crusade, to not to put too fine a point on it with the same word that has been used.
What do you think your next project to direct will be?
Well, I'm kind of obsessed about that. I'm also obsessed about the nature of identity in general. I think it's very exciting what's going on with the people deciding what kind of sex they want to be and all that sort of stuff. Normally, people find that have a derisory opinion of that and find that really kind of ridiculous. How dare you choose your sex? You know what? I'm okay with it. It's taken me a while too, because I've been like, well, do I really have to think of what to call them? I can't say he or she.
Yeah, it's not that you're opposed to it, but it's like learning a new language.
Exactly. It's off-pissing, It makes you go, I've just got to grips with this damn language, and now I've got to figure out more kind of pronouns.
I have two fraternity brothers from college who are now my fraternity sisters. I had dinner with them about a year ago. They're the same people.
Hopefully, if I'm listening to them, and hopefully they're them now, and that's been the problem. It must be pretty awful to grow up not, being in the wrong body. I feel it some days myself, but in a totally different way, just because I get the blues. I know what it would be like to be incarcerated there, and I think that's been a major advance. And I too was exactly the same. You know what? The women fought for 2,000 years. Blacks have fought for 400 years. Gays have been fighting since the turn of the 20th century. And yet you guys want it today? We only just found out about you guys, and you want it now? We've only just arrived on the scene. And actually, I'm wrong. They absolutely deserve it all now. And I'm hoping that the solidarity between us, Frederick Douglass, thank you. He had to rely on the feminist movement to get going. The feminist movement was picking up traction, and in order for him to get a voice, he went into the churches where the feminist movement were having discussions and talks, and he was invited to talk about the race issue, and that gave enormous momentum because it was a sympathetic crew who were listening. People who wanted emancipation for women were likely to want emancipation for black people. Now, I think that the gay community were very smart to get into bed metaphorically with the feminist community and say, let's make this all one argument. And I'm hoping the trans people get together with the blacks, the gays, and everybody else. And because it is most of the world against the people who just refuse, the incalcitrance of people who refuse to move with the times.
And let's face it, we both grew up in countries where, unless you were a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant male who was born into a certain social caste, the odds were against you, no matter what you wanted to do. And no other business is more indicative of that than show business. I mean, you look at all these actors sort of pre-1960s who had to anglicize their names. A great example is a Russian Jewish person named Isser Danielovich had to become a Scottish guy named Kirk Douglas.
And Jewish people are part of this resistance movement, and it's wonderful to see that synagogues are opening themselves to immigrants, and there is a movement happening, and it is pretty exciting to be here. Even though we've, I hope, hit some kind of apotheosis with the last president, the 45th one. I mean, I love him or hate him. I thought he was terrific on TV. But he has done some pretty terrible things in terms of cohesion and love. And those seem like hippie words because they are. But those hippie words are really powerful words. And we need, I walk down the street here during the election. I live in a small town in Western Massachusetts. And most of the signs are for Biden or Black Lives Matter. But then there are the Trump-Pence signs. And these guys hate each other, They hate each other. And I don't think I've ever lived in a time when people couldn't put aside their political differences.
Well, I've spent my entire life in the U.S., and according to my parents and other people who were cognizant and alive during 1968, which everyone universally agreed was the worst year in American history, they said that this year, 2020 in particular, and the past 4 years in general, makes 1968 look like a cakewalk.
Yeah. And it's broke when you have a massive pandemic that breaks out in the whole world. And that doesn't create unity. Something's wrong.
Tell us a bit about what you've been doing with your time during the lockdown.
Full disclosure, I've been playing a lot of Xbox. That basically keeps me sane. I don't have children in the house. I hook up with my friends because they're all playing it too. So my brother, who's in England, plays it. And another friend of mine in Birmingham in England plays it. So it keeps me in touch. It's just an easy way to stay active and engaged without and using my brain on some level. Otherwise, I could just sit in front of the TV and forget to think. My wife's a lawyer, so she spends most of her day downstairs, and that gives me an excuse to go upstairs and play a cheeky game of Destiny 2. Then the thing I'm kind of most fascinated by and where I'm learning in my kind of school is I somehow with Mel, who's run a fan club for me for over 2 decades, we started a social club on Zoom. And it was just a thing to go, hey guys, I hope you guys are okay. You can all meet up here. Let's chat. It was really me interviewing them rather than them interviewing me. So I interview people for about 15 to 20 minutes each from weirdly all over the world now. We've just had someone from Nepal who is actually a Sherpa. And I forgot that was an ethnicity, a tribe. I thought it was a job, but no, it's something more than that. And we've got people in Russia and China and all over the world, South America, Central America, hundreds from America and hundreds from England. And they meet every week, twice a week. And we talk about their world and what's going on and makes them nervous or unhappy. And we have a huge community, queer community, because they were they responded to Bashir. For reasons I'm beginning to understand when I did Deep Space Nine. And we have a lot of uncomfortable people. And it's really good fun. So that's kind of what we're doing. It's a fascinating world where I have 100 to 300 people in little boxes all over my television screen. And I'm chatting away.
I'd like to see your stuff when you start directing again. I really enjoyed the 2 episodes of Deep Space Nine that you directed.
Thank you. I will get. I've made a promise to myself that if I'm going to direct, I'm going to have to write it. I may need help writing it, but it's going to have to come out of my head.
You mentioned a fan club earlier. Where can people find that? I
have no social media presence at all. But if you think people might be interested or people may not have got the message, the sidcity.net, it's SID city.net, is my fan club. And it's usually about 14 people, but right now it's rather bigger because of all the social meetings we're having.
Are there any charitable organizations that have a place in your heart or that you find important which could use our support?
Doctors Without Frontiers, every single day. I mean, right now, everything's important. Dogs are important, but Doctors Without Frontiers are as heroic as the people fighting COVID as heroic as any soldier, because they are getting killed even though they have no guns, in hospitals on front lines, and they're making sure our enemies are getting the best medical care they can possibly get. A country is judged more by the way it treats its enemies than its friends.
I do not believe you could have done more to help me.
It's not over.
No?
No.
No. We were fond together because of the sweep of the open places, the taste of the wide winds, the sunlight, and the hopes in which we worked. The morning freshness of the world to be intoxicated us. We were wrought up with ideas inexpressible and vaporous, but to be fought for. We lived many lives in those whirling campaigns, never sparing ourselves. Yet, when we achieved and the new world dawned, the old men came out again and took our victory to remake in the likeness of the former world they knew.
My thanks to Alexander Siddig for his time. It was a pleasure and an honor. I look forward to his future acting and directing. The movie Skylines will be in theaters and streaming on December 18th, 2020. It's distributed by Vertical Entertainment. Thanks also to Priscilla Rios of KWPR. If you have any comments on this interview, come on over to our Facebook page and let's chat. Remember to subscribe to this podcast on Apple, Google, Spotify, and all major podcast apps. Can you do me a quick favor? Can you go on to Apple or Google Podcasts and do a quick review of the show? Can you then tell 3 friends about the show? We are building a community of real movie lovers, and we want everyone to get involved for the sake of movie making and this podcast. Thank you so much in advance, and we'll see you in Hollywood. The Hollywood Interview is produced by me, Alex Simon, for Wanderer Productions, executive produced by Connell O'Herlihy for No One Else Media.
No one else.